Okay, hello. So we'd like to start today by acknowledging that we meet today on the lands of the Kulong Nation. We pay our respects to all Indigenous elders past and present. We recognise that sovereignty was never ceded and this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Furthermore, we'd like to extend a warm welcome to all First Nations peoples that may join us today. And finally, we invite all of you joining us online to pay respects to the traditional owners of the lands that you join us from today. So welcome. Welcome to all of you joining us in the arcade today, and welcome to those of you joining us via Twitch. So, today we celebrate the partnership of SAE and the arcade. SAE are our official education partners for our student engagement program here at the arcade, and we couldn't be happier about it. Throughout the year, we've had final year game developers, students work within our space developing their final capstone projects within the arcade. So they are able to build these games with the support of developers around them and generate real engagement and network with people while they're in the most crucial part of their career, the early stages. And we couldn't have been happier with how it's gone. So this event will be the first of many SAE and arcade collaboration events. And today, we're going to explore all the many diverse pathways there are to get into the games industry with the help of our amazing, talented early career panelists. So, without further ado, let me introduce you to our panelists. Starting with Elise. Tell us a little bit about who you are, your background, and what you're currently working on.
Awesome. Hello, I am Elise. I'm a producer here in Melbourne. I feel I have to say that now because I work for Avalanche now, so the traditionally Swedish studio. So I'm very used to being like, oh, hello, I'm Australian. G'day, mates. So I've been working in production for about 6 years now. I got started at Big Ant Studios, then I worked at Samurai Punk here in the arcade, and now I work for Avalanche Studios and Ghost Pattern, the Melbourne team behind Wayward Strand. I went to SAE as well, so that's kind of exciting. It's like 7 years later, being like, oh, look, you all look like me. Everything's going to be okay. That's me.
My name's Jake. I'm basically a songwriter, producer, disguised as a video game developer with serious envy for stand-up comedians. So really what that means is that kind of my niche in games is pop music and video games crossing over. And so I've kind of carved out a bit of a niche, a bit of a path for myself creating games with pop music in them. And because I just love both of those worlds so much, I can't stop doing either of them. So I kind of make my own stuff when I get grants and funding, and kind of in between that I do some contract work to spice up my bank account. But I really enjoy that as well.
I'm Jimbles. I'm a XR developer at a company called Flame Systems. Before that, I worked for a company called EXP that did work for Flame Systems, and they were based out of the arcade. And then before that, I worked at a company called Lightmare, also in the arcade. Pretty simple on that end.
Fantastic. Okay, so what was it about you that, what was it about the games industry that enticed you in? And I'm going to start with Jimbles on this one.
I really didn't know that much about video games. Like growing up, my parents were just like, it's a waste of money. So they never really bought us any consoles or whatever. But, in primary school, started like having like computers in classrooms, and I was like, these things are pretty cool. So I always wanted to, like, when people would ask me, like, what do you want to do when you grow up? I'm like, I want to work on computers. And then in high school, my parents kind of relented. They like bought a Wii or whatever. I was like, these are pretty cool. And I didn't know what I wanted to do with computers, but the thing about video games is there's just so many disciplines, and there are so many cool, interesting ways to be a part of that. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. So when I finished high school, I was looking at universities, and I was like, Swinburne has a double degree, computer science and game design. Computer science might get me a job. Game design might like keep me motivated to stay at uni and finish my computer science degree. And that was really the start, and then I ended up here.
What do you think it was that sort of like got your parents past that point? Because video games has a real problem where it's perceived by the older generations as for kids. What do you think it was that sort of get your parents across the line to, letting you, study that?
I think the first thing that got them on board to like video games at all was just like Wii Sports. It's like, it's active. I see. You can like, and then that was the only game that involved standing up.
Not the way I play it.
Yeah, and my parents are still a little bit like unsure about it, right? But then I applied all the knowledge that I learned making games to Flame, which is all like applied game technologies, like training firefighters in like a safer, better for the environment way, because a lot of like setting fire to things just to put them out, not great. And also
Great
just
lesson.
Yeah.
For everyone here.
That's for the kids at home.
yeah, and like aviation, like foam to put out aviation fires is like super carcinogenic. So like that's what really my dad especially was like, oh yeah, government. All right, yeah, I know,
Yeah.
I understand now.
And what about yourself, Jake?
Well, that's sorry, Jimble's coming to the mic a little bit closer. Twitch chat's already called us out.
Sorry, Twitch.
I think the question that you asked is like what enticed us to the games industry, but I guess for me, like creativity always comes first. So it was really the creative aspects of games that really, really excited me, and the industry was really an afterthought. But then, so what motivates me is creativity and people. And before I was anywhere near games, I worked for Ubisoft at their kind of their PAX booth, I think even in the first PAX, and it was right opposite all of the indies. So I just spent the entire time kind of working, but then just talking to all of these indie developers. So that was when my kind of mind started to churn over about that maybe there was something there in the community as well. So I guess really it was the creative aspect, the fact that I could express myself in so many different kind of ways with one art form, and then the community that I already felt was there that kind of made me excited about it.
I love that the versatility of games is amazing for creating art. There's just so much that you can do to engage the player. It's beyond anything when you take it out of just still form and you build it into something interactive. There's limitless possibilities of games.
Exactly.
I'll get lost in that train of thought. So before that, Elise, what enticed you into games?
So it beckons an interesting question, which is why 17-year-olds in high school are allowed to determine what they're going to do with the rest of their lives. Like, we were making jokes before, like, Jake and I didn't like avocado in our early 20s. It's like, I knew nothing of life. How
Who were we?
naive I was, yeah.
Picking the salad off of my chicken parma
Yeah,
at the
yeah.
pub.
Such kids. So when I was finishing high school, I was 17 and I couldn't really travel. I always thought I would take a gap year, but didn't do the maths on you can't really travel and enjoy life in, at the time, London when you're 17 years old. So I was like, oh, I should just like buckle down, go to university. And I always had that from my parents. It's like, you have to go to university. That wasn't even a question. So I had to go to university. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I just like flipped through the that like guidebook that has like every degree, and I ended up with marine biology and games. And I was like, cool, one of those will be fun. I don't know, we'll figure it out. It'll be okay. And all throughout high school, because I didn't know what I wanted to do, I was really afraid of the idea of deciding what I wanted to do and not being able to get in. So I worked I can't.
Took us?
Yes, thank you. Off during high school to make sure that I had like all the opportunities present for me. And so when I applied for quantum, I got a scholarship because I had a high ATAR score into whatever. And so that was kind of like, oh, scholarship, that makes me feel special. I'm going to go there. They like me. That sounds good. And so even then I was like, games, okay. I'd always loved video games as a kid. Like I remember we would go shopping with like my mum and my sister, and the only way they could get me to go was we had to go to EB first, and I'd pick up like a new Game Boy game. So I would just like sit on the couches while they're in like Kukai and all these like fancy clothing stores, and I was like, hey, Nemo, new game, how exciting. So when I finished uni, even then I still didn't necessarily know, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but going to university, I just fell in love with the process of video games, of this like collaborative experience that even if the end product was like complete trash, it was still something that someone could interact with. And even just seeing like other 18-year-old kids come up with these amazing ideas and creating these tiny little games, I was like, I want to be a part of that. That's really cool. Like people can just do it themselves. Like someone comes to uni one day and 2 weeks later, they're showing off the idea that they made, even if it's in like a rudimentary form. So I think that's what made me super excited, and that's why I've sort of always wanted to stick to video games and not move into like film or television is just that interactive element specifically, I think is just a really exciting way to be able to tell our stories in a more engaging platform.
Absolutely. Brilliant answer. I rant for years about the idea that, like, you know, games are not a still format. You can do so much with them, and there's so much more experimentation to be done. There's so much more technology that we haven't untapped yet that was going to make games even greater in the years to come. So I'll move on now to, and I'll get you to start off with this one, Jake, which is, what's something you're good at, and what's something that you're getting better at?
Jake is good at everything.
Everything. Yeah. That's
How
my
much
answer.
time do you have?
No, I feel like in particular this year, I've noticed that I'm really very good at like distilling ideas and bringing them down to their like simplest form and just cutting and cutting and cutting and going, but like constantly asking the question. Like I've worked with a couple of different designers a few times this year, and it's always me going, but what does the player actually physically do in that like moment, in that 2 seconds? What do they do? What do they do? And just really getting down to the nuts and bolts of design. I think I've gotten really, really good at that.
That's a really important skill, because it's one of the biggest traps that people fall into game development is making yourself the audience, which means that as you're designing things, you're not thinking about what the player is doing who's never played your game at that exact moment in time, because in your head you know what the next thing that's going to happen in the game is, so you immediately do it. So the number of times I've just like, you are not your own audience. Have somebody else play test this. Have someone else look in. It will completely change your game once you have somebody else's perspective.
Yeah, exactly. And just being able to communicate with other designers, with programmers, with anyone else that I work with, I'm really, really good at that, and it's been very, very helpful. The other part was, what am I
getting better at?
What am I getting better at? I'm getting better at programming. I think you'll probably hear this often, like maybe you've already heard it before, that your actual like hard technical skills are not, like that's not what's going to get you jobs necessarily. And I think there's even research showing that, you know, people are hired 80% because of their communication and soft skills, and only 20% because of their actual technical skill for the job. So, like, I'm a great musician. I'm an okay game developer. But I think I've found my success here because I have all of those other, you know, creative and kind of softer skills. Yeah.
How about yourself, Elise?
Sort of similar in that when I left university, I sort of had like a dreadful moment where I was looking around and like, you know, like Benji, who works at the arcade, looking at his art, I was like, well, I guess I'm not going to be an artist then. And I'm like looking at programmers who are incredible. I'm like, well, I guess I'm not going to be a programmer. And I originally thought I was going to do game design, and I was looking at other people's designs. I was like, all right, that's me, counted out. Like, I'm done. Oh, well, games industry was fun while it lasted.
Do you know the two cakes thing at all?
No.
There's like a great like internet meme about like the imposter syndrome and the way that people see other artists, and it's from their perspective. They look at this beautiful cake that's amazing, so like Benji's art, and be like, oh wow, my cake is terrible, nobody's ever gonna like my cake. And then it flips to the audience and they go, oh wow, two cakes. Like, yeah,
that's great. That's great. So when I finished uni, I was like, oh, I'm not the best at any of these things. But I realized pretty quickly that I was good at connecting with people. Like I found it much easier when we had networking events or similar. I had no problems just like going up to people and being like, hey, how's it going? That was a cool talk. So like, tell me more about yourself. And I noticed that a lot of people like really, really struggled with that. So I was like, that's what I have to lean into. I just have to like talk to people and be friendly and build up a good reputation. And that's how I got my job. Like I was an assistant manager at EB Games, and the boss my direct manager was friends with the manager of Big Ant Studios, like the CEO of Big Ant. So because I'd left a good impression on my boss, because I worked really hard at EB, he felt more confident that he could like recommend me to someone else, because he's like, no, she works really hard. And it was like video game retail, right? So he's like, she's clearly not like above anything. She'll work hard at whatever you put in front of her. So it was good to build up that relationship. And so that's what I think I'm good at. I can talk to people. I can build relationships and trust quite well. What I'm trying to get better at, I find it really hard to deliver like harsh criticisms to people or like constructive feedback. And as I'm moving more into a AAA company, that becomes more and more important. It's suddenly not your friend that you work with every day that you have to say like, oh, can you maybe like tone it down with that? I have to have like very formal meetings where I have to assess people's jobs and their career paths, and that can be really intimidating, especially if, you know, it's a veteran who's been in the industry for 30 years and I have to be the one to be like, actually, you're not that great at this, you could really improve, these are some things that I would suggest. So in my head, those situations go very well, but I'm always like very nervous going into those meetings, and I'm like hiding my hands because secretly they're like shaking and like leaking everywhere. So less leaky hands is what I want to get better at.
Yeah, there's just so much of a constant feedback in game development, especially in a producer role, that I do not envy you at all.
Just keep some silica gel packets in like in your pockets.
Yeah.
That's such a good idea.
Yeah. And you can dry them out, put them in the oven on a low heat for a couple hours. So they're reusable. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, that's my takeaway from today's talk. Thank you, everyone.
I love your problem solving. So yeah, tell us a little bit about what you're good at and what you are getting better at.
Yeah, I think one thing I'm good at, and I feel like a lot of sort of the technical kid, like the kid who knows computers in the family, just like being able to like break down sort of more complex stuff, or even just like regular stuff that's, you know, just jargon, breaking that down into layman's terms and communicating. Like it starts with helping my mum connect the printer, and then it moves on to like dealing with like interdisciplinary communication between like artists and like us as programmers, being like, this is what we need. And then it's like, oh, but that's a whole lot of words. This is what I mean by saying this is what we need. Or like, what do you need? All right. Trying to like decode other disciplines' language into yours.
That's so incredibly important. Like, you know, directly to all the programmers out there, you're not an excellent programmer if you're good at programming. You're an excellent programmer if you can explain what you're doing to other people on the team without relying on jargon, words, and acronyms.
Yeah,
It's a big thing.
Yeah, if you can like break down a really complex feature without like everybody listening crossing their eyes, you're doing like an okay job. Something that I'm getting better at is like trusting my programmer instincts, because you know, now that I am working on more complex things, as I've like gone through in my career, is sometimes you'll be like, oh yeah, just fang this feature in, it'll, you know, be pretty quick, and then it's like the back of my head, I'm like, something's missing. Something's missing. What is it? What do we need? And actually like stopping and looking for that problem instead of just like barreling on ahead until I smack into it, which is really handy. And then actually communicating that as well. Because like when your senior programmer is like, it's simple. You're like, well, he thinks it's simple. Surely it must be simple. And I have to just figure it out and stare at the, you know, break this down and try and figure it out for a couple hours before I ask for help. It's like, no, you know, the problem is there. Like, just put your hand up. Saves a lot of time. It's a lot harder from work from home. So I think that's why being in the office, being able to practice just face to face, like look somebody in the eyes and be like, hey, like what's going on?
I think that's such a good point. Like I have so many interactions with people where I'm like, hey, there's this bug, it's super high priority, can you have a look at it? And then I'll check in like a day later and they're like, oh, I still can't figure it out. I'm like, have you asked someone? Have you spoken to someone? Like, you're not all individual superheroes. Like, we as a team make up this amazing, you know, this amazing conglomerate hero. So, you know, you can't do it all on your own. No one expects you to do it on your own. I actually would prefer you don't do it on your own, so that if you leave the company, someone else knows how you fix this problem.
The Voltron philosophy.
Of course, yes. The Voltron philosophy. It's what I always say.
Yeah, it's in all the textbooks.
Yeah.
You haven't heard of this?
Brilliant. All right, so my next question is, what is a non-game development skill that you've learned that has helped you become better at your job or helped you the most in your career? And I'll start with you, Elise.
I want to be nitpicky and say that there are no skills that aren't technically game development skills, but I'll try not to. Yeah. I don't know. What is a game development skill? Is it just learning to code? Is that it? You know, or being an artist, because that's not technically just a game development skill. I don't know. You have to be good at everything. I know that's difficult, but like, it would probably come back to that same thing of like interpersonal skills and like just being comfortable with people and talking to people. Working in retail management, I worked at Swanston Street, Melbourne Central, like in the city, so they're the like flagship store and the second busiest store. So I like learning how to time manage and how things work under pressure and how to keep my cool when everyone's like crying in the back room on Boxing Day. I'm like, everything's fine, it's cool. There's plenty more copies of GTA, we'll be okay. Yeah, so probably just like knowing how to talk to people. I think just any skill that you can pick up in retail or hospitality are like my number one. You won't learn this at university, but it's going to get you the furthest.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. 10 years retail, like you learn a lot. You learn a lot about time constraints. You learn a lot about working under pressure. You learn a lot about how to communicate with different people. Because like another big trap that people fall into is everything you have done in your life is is your own frame of reference. You need to like get into other people's shoes and understand how they think to effectively work in a team. And high pressure retail environments teaches you that quick smart.
And I think it gives you a lot of personal confidence as well. I know that was certainly the case for me, and having personal confidence and just going, I can handle this situation, I can get through it, I can overcome it, has been a really, really kind of big skill that I think has helped. And to kind of to piggyback off that, like I think the main thing that's really helped my career has been able to like having the skill to be able to write grants and ask for things that I want, but do it in a way that is confident and is very, very clear. And like I just know how to pitch myself, in kind of a lot of scenarios. And I really don't think I would have that confidence if I hadn't kind of worked in customer service and retail and stuff as well in the past.
But even like Jake and I have sat at bars where I'm like, can you teach me how to ask for what I want? Like, I don't know how to do that. That's super intimidating. I'll just take what I get and say thanks. So yeah, it's definitely one of your best skills. Like you sell yourself so much that I'm like, oh, Jake's amazing. Look at everything. Oh, look at what he did there. It's good.
That's very sweet. Thank you. But yeah, it's a powerful skill. Like you have to learn how to ask for things, whether it's like from your team members, from people that you're collaborating with. And usually I think that also means just asking them like I know you can kind of do better. I know you have got other thoughts, like, tell me I want that. I want you to give me that, or I want you to give me thousands of dollars, or I want you to give me this job. But just having the confidence to ask and feel that you really deserve it as well. It's a big thing.
Yeah, you've just reminded me of a time that we were speaking and we were talking about like asserting confidence in terms of like reviews within your company and asking for pay rises that you deserve. And you taught me this exercise that I use now, which is that you just look yourself in the mirror directly and you say out loud the amount of money that you think that you're worth, and you keep going up and up and up. And at the point where you laugh and you're like, that's too much money, that's how much you ask for.
Yeah.
Jake, you're a genius.
That
so good.
Is amazing. I didn't come up with that. I did not come up with that. But I'm glad that it's worked for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so important that self-worth means so much, especially in that idea of pitching yourself. You are going to have to constantly pitch yourself in your career over and over and over again. And it's one of the hardest things to learn. I think for me personally, I build my confidence by surrounding myself with amazing people. And it's like, there's this little like thought exercise that I like, which is that you are the amalgamation of the 5 people that you spend the most amount of time with. So think about that. Think about that, because it means a lot. Like if you are at a point where you are low self-confidence, think about the people that are around you. Do they raise you up? Do they help you? Do they help you believe in yourself? And you will find that if you surround yourself with more positive people, it's much easier to pitch yourself.
Do cats count?
I'm going to say yes.
Yeah, okay. All right, then we're good.
Definitely.
I don't think I've ever known a cat to raise anybody up, though.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm like working away at something and feeling like a little disgruntled, and my cat will just like jump up on my lap and be like, meow, which means you can do it. So,
okay, yeah. I forgot that you speak cat.
Yeah.
That's probably extra helpful.
Oh, yeah, sorry, that's one of my skills. Yeah.
It's one I need to get better at.
What about yourself, Jimbles?
Like I'm with Elise on like the thing of just like what is a game development skill, because before I entered games, I was a handyman working for my dad. patching walls, painting, all that kind of stuff.
If anyone's seen The Castle, Jimble's dad is basically Dale Kerrigan, just for context.
Yeah, he owns 4 barbecues, and he lent me 2 of them. And yeah, so and just having that sort of lateral thinking brain where it's just like, all right, here's the problem. There is no one way to solve it. And then going from there, jumping into games, I started doing just other stuff that interested me. Like in my first uni capstone, I built an arcade cabinet thing with all the buttons and stuff to play our capstone game on, which was not a requirement. And in fact,
That would be the worst requirement ever at a games degree.
Yeah.
You have to build
Yeah.
an arcade cabinet.
yeah, you have to build the thing. But and it was, it was a hassle because it's all right, now I got to carry this everywhere for people to get the experience. But just sort of broadening horizons, picking up bits and pieces, just seeing what feels good. That's what got me my job at EXP because they did contract stuff, events, real estate contracts, just AR apps to look at mansions or whatever. Just the ability to pick up things quickly is not necessarily a game development skill, but in the indie space, it very much is, right? Especially the indie space, because you do not specialize. You can't specialize, because if you spend too much time specializing, nothing else is going to get done. So yeah, managing that and just picking stuff up as I go along, I think, is something that has served me pretty well.
Brilliant. Okay, so my next question, I'm going to direct this at you as well, Jimbles. So who are some of the key people you met along the way in your career who helped inspire you or helped you along your journey?
Oh, I'm looking at him.
I think we can leave now.
Well, seriously though, you were one of the sort of first people I met at the arcade who was just all right, yep, what can I do for you? What can we do for each other? We helped each other out on a bit of a conundrum.
So for context, I've been in this job since January 2018, and in the first week I met Jimbles because he was in the student program. So
yeah, so I was I know my way around this place. Don't you worry. And yeah, that was amazing. One of my first game dev jobs, I worked with a guy called Nick London. He is...
We stand Nick London.
We do stand Nick London. He's amazing because not only is he a bloody genius, but he's just lovely and he's giving. I haven't worked with him for years, and occasionally I'll have kind of a tough problem. I'll be hey man, what do you know about what do you know about this? And he's not a lot, but give me a minute, and then I'll come back with a whole this script here explains the problem. And I'm oh, awesome. Now I can move forward.
And Nick is one of those programmers that we sort of talked about before, of he can break down a problem without using jargon and really fully explain it, which is the best programmers.
Yeah, at one PAX we were at boat builders, having a beer in between whatever, and then he just started explaining some sort of trigonometry concept to me because I was struggling on something at uni. It's all right, do you want another beer?
What about yourself, Jake?
There's a few people. So in terms of pure game development, I was really lucky when I was studying games. I did student exchange to Montreal, and there was a producer there. He was one of the producers from Far Cry 3, but he'd kind of gone indie and was working for this studio that was kind of doing music games. And I knew basically nothing about games. I was so green. But because of my background in music, he gave me a chance as a junior designer, which was wild. But looking back on it now, I really feel he maybe wanted to have someone to mentor and help. And he really, really did. He pushed me really hard and expected a lot, but I learned so much. From just working with someone that did that gave me that responsibility. So I, kind of credit a lot of how I work in games and my processes or the way I think about it to him. And it was only a small time, but it made a huge impact. There was also Liam Rout and Meredith Hall, who used to work for Film Victoria, and they were kind of the first people, they were hearing that I was kind of doing, pop music and games, and like, you should apply for funding. You should totally go for it. Like they really encouraged me to step outside of my comfort zone and actually be vulnerable in that way.
And they're always so jazzed to hear about like what you're working on as well.
Yeah, exactly. So, I really look up to them for encouraging me, but everyone else as well. I think that's a huge thing. And the last person that it's kind of a silly one, but also really serious. So I'm a huge Evanescence fan. So Amy Lee is just always a big inspiration to me. But in particular, kind of around this time when I was in Montreal, actually, I was really struggling with the fact that I was so in love with music and so in love with games. And I had so many people tell me, Jake, you have to choose one. You have to choose one. You can't do multiple things. Like, this is a big weakness that you have. And so there I was just watching interviews with Amy Lee, as I do sometimes. And she just said this thing, which was 9 times out of 10, what you think is your biggest flaw is actually your strength. Like, lean into that thing. And it just kind of clicked to me. I was like, oh, the fact that I do both of these things is actually the biggest strength that I have. And then that led to basically everything that I do now. So yeah, just hearing that from someone that I looked up to, even if it wasn't directly for me, was surprisingly important.
Thank you, Amy Lee.
Thank you, Amy Lee.
I think I've always owed a lot of gratitude to the team at Big Ant, because I was this little kid working in retail with a game degree that I didn't know what to do with at the time. I hadn't even heard of production. Like, when they sent me, because I originally applied as an artist, which was very naive, that didn't work out, but I'd left a good impression, so they contacted me back and were like, hey, we actually think you'd be really good for an assistant producer role. I was like, oh, what's a producer? I didn't even know. So I think I have a lot of gratitude. I have a lot of gratitude towards Mike and Ross from the Big Ant team for taking a shot on me and sort of unleashing my career. As far as inspirational people who helped along the way, it's kind of tricky. I think this industry, as much as we can help each other, it's so small that you kind of have to be out for yourself most of the time. So there's a million people who helped nudge me in positive directions, or were positive affirmations, but I think we all sort of do that for each other. As far as inspiration, Diane von Furstenberg, who's a fashion designer, she invented the wrap dress. She's probably my biggest inspiration. I try as hard as I can to not surround my entire life with the games industry, so I try and look outwards for inspiration. And she's just this amazing woman who has great principles and is very successful, does a lot of workshops to coach other people to build that confidence and to sort of find what they are good at. And she has a lot of books. I'd recommend looking into her. She's just an amazing role model in general. So that's probably my biggest influence. And her hair is amazing. She's just amazing. She's amazing.
Yeah, I really like this idea of looking outside of games for inspiration. Something that we do at the arcade when we're interviewing people for our various programs and sort of to enter the open plan hot desking area is we ask people what is a hobby or interest that they have outside of gaming, because it's actually so incredibly helpful to have a hobby and interest outside of gaming, because it really gives you this perspective. You get these new ideas about things. I read a study the other day that was interesting, that was by Michigan State University, that said that scientists that also were either actors or magicians are 22 times more likely to be Nobel Prize winners. So yeah, it's a really interesting study about how hobbies come into play in your in scientific method and
Greatest magic trick of all.
Yeah, made a Nobel Prize appear.
Isn't that Christopher Lee, right? Who was in the military, and I don't know, I'm going to say an astronaut. I know that's not true, but it could be. Who knows? He did everything.
Yeah.
And look at how successful he was.
Absolutely. So definitely, yeah. External hobbies, so incredibly useful. And I loved what you said, Jake, about that idea of people said it was your weakness, but it's your greatest strength. Right there. That's so powerful.
Thank you.
Okay. So my next question is, what advice would you give yourself 5 years ago / when you were first starting out in games? And I'm going to start with you, Elise.
You always give me the tough ones. What would I have told myself 5 years ago? Oh, so many things. To like avocados. I wish I had known that earlier. I did lack a lot of confidence earlier on, so maybe just that hindsight to be like, it's okay, it'll all be okay, like, don't stress. Also, I think coming out of university, I was so pent up with like, I have to get a games job, like now, or otherwise I'm a failure. And I wish I didn't put that pressure on myself. I could have just, worked in retail, been happy, which is what I did do, and it all sort of worked out. So taking some of that pressure away. That's sort of general advice. More specific would be, I was incredibly intimidated by successful women in the industry, and I missed out on a lot of opportunities to form good connections there. It's something we're talking a lot about at work now is, we live in a society where women aren't encouraged to like come together and work together and lift each other up. We're always in competition with each other. And I really regret not just like saying screw it and being best friends with every woman in the games industry, because now that I've grown in the industry, I've met so many amazing women that I'm like, I just needed you 5 years ago to tell me that it'll be okay, or that like women can do this, because, I grew up kind of loving video games and being bullied for it, because it's weird to have a girl in year 7 who preferred to play Pokemon than like be in, literally they called it the mother's club, right? So like I had this like weird relationship with women growing up in this like patriarchal society, and I let that, I think, really affect my chances of a good career, because I just pushed people away that I should have welcomed in, and I made my journey so much more solo than it needed to be. I could have actually found a group to rally behind me much earlier on.
That was amazing. This is why I picked you personally. So just so you know.
I love that.
Jake.
Sure. This one is going to blow your minds way less than that.
Yeah, I'm like, I got nothing.
But this one's kind of a more practical thing, I guess for myself. Like a lot of what I do is kind of ideas and design, and like I just like creating things. And when I first got into game dev, I was quite afraid of programming. Like I dropped out of high school and I wasn't very good at maths. And so I was like, I can't be a programmer, which was not the case at all. So I wish that when I was studying games that I focused a lot more on programming. If I was to do my degree again, and this is just for my own personal journey, it doesn't apply to everyone, I would have done a programming degree, a computer science degree with a minor in game design, because I've found that most of the design choices that I've made, with some exceptions, have been very, very instinctual. Creativity and design is very instinctual for me, and that's something that I've picked up just throughout my life, from playing games, from being a musician, and thinking about games, critically, just from being creative, and having the like technical skills to express my ideas the way that I want them, would have come in more handy for me, and I'm getting there. And now I can just like hire people sometimes to do that for me. But I wish that I could do that more for myself. So I don't know if that kind of resonates with you. Then you don't have to be scared of programming. Literally anyone can learn it, and you don't have to do too much complex maths.
Yeah, I think that's a really important lesson to learn, that sometimes the thing that you should be pursuing and learning more about is the thing that you're not good at, not the thing that you're good at. So like, yeah, I'm the same boat. I'm a high school dropout. I always thought I was terrible at maths, and now I'm the spreadsheet king. It's like you never really know until you really push yourself into something and put yourself in the driver's seat how much you will improve, and the perceptions that you have about yourself, about what you are not good at, it can be completely false. You never know until you put yourself in the driver's seat and just get in there and engage. So yeah, it's so brilliant. Jimbles.
Well, yeah. On a personal note, I would probably just go and like drop a quick note, just be like, hey man, go like get that ADHD diagnosis a little earlier. Might sort you out a bit sooner. Maybe try some therapy, just figure some stuff out.
That's a big one. I've seen in so many people's GCAPs like talks, the first slide is go to therapy.
Yeah, and like therapy isn't like for everybody, and it like shouldn't be, because then there would be like
not enough therapists.
There would be not enough therapists, and you would have some pretty rubbish therapists trying to fill that gap. But I think more generally, just trying to like tell myself like, hey, just be your authentic self the whole time, you know, because like especially when you go to like networking events and stuff like that, and it's like I have to be the like candidate, I have to be like the person who you would want to hire or whatever. And it's like, no, just like, you know, you can be a bit of a dork as long as you're not a terrible person, you know, as long like just engaging with other people as humans and being your own self, it makes friends.
Yeah, just be
instead
present.
of
Like-
it makes friends instead of connections, which is way better.
I think there's a lot of advice that I give very commonly to early career people about networking is that you need to be present. You need to be in the conversation, focusing on the conversation at the time. Don't get in your head about how this is going to help your career, or if this is the right person to talk to, or if you think that this is going to be the big move. Because the longer you spend in your head thinking about that, you're not present anymore. You're not engaging.
Kerry's talking right now. He's talking to you guys, and then
Yeah.
it's my turn to talk next. And I have to think about the smart thing that I'm going to say.
I think, yeah, that's such a great point. And I've had a lot of conversations with people like coming out of university. They're like, oh, I don't know what to do now. Like, what's my next step? And that was like the number one thing, because we've become as an industry really focused on networking, which is important. Like, you do have to talk to people and you do have to make connections. But that topic of like friendship or like actual connection versus just talking to people, like if I go to an event, this happened a lot really early on at like at GCAP, where people would come to me and be like, hi, I'm this is what I do, this is what kind of job I'm looking for. I'm like, I'm not a recruiter. Why are you talking to me about this? Like, what was your name? What are you interested in? Like, and it has the exact opposite response in me to what I think people are going for, which is like, oh, I'm trying to make connections. I'm like, okay, go be yourself. Like, how would you make connections if it wasn't an industry event? Act like that. Like, just leave a good impression on someone, because at the end of the day, when I am involved in hiring and I see a bunch of resumes, like even just seeing someone's name, I was like, oh yeah, I remember them. They also really liked Gilmore Girls. Like, that's so much more memorable than like the 70 portfolios that I've seen. So just actually having a human interaction and taking away, I guess that's probably early career advice as well, of like taking away the stigma almost and the pressure of talking to someone in the games industry or someone who's like really high up. I always forget his name. The guy who makes Psychonauts.
Tim Schafer?
Yes, thank you. So like at New Zealand GDC, I got invited to this like production lunch, and I got like seated right next to him. And at first I was like, oh my God, what do I say? Like, I don't even know how to speak words anymore. I was like, wait, I'm sitting next to a person, just like any other person. Don't get back into that headspace. Talk to him as a person. And we ended up bonding over like game jams and how much we like it and like what has worked and what hasn't worked. And I don't need to learn life advice from Tim Schafer. Like, I can just talk to him as a person. And I think, yeah, getting rid of that pressure of like, this conversation needs to lead to a job. It doesn't. This conversation needs to lead to someone having a good impression of me, and maybe enough of those will slowly manifest into a place where one day I get a job because of these good impressions, not because I had this one conversation with this one person and I said all the right things.
Yeah, if there's time, I'd love to share another kind of similar
Yeah,
story.
get in there.
So this opportunity that I had in Montreal with this like super cool producer, the first time I met him was actually, it was at a party, and it was a game dev focused party, and I don't know how I started talking to him, but I had no idea who he was. And then straight up he mentioned kind of what he did, and he used to be a producer at Ubisoft and stuff, but he also mentioned his kids. And then so the whole conversation, I just asked about his kids, and he told me about his family, and he went camping, and we spoke for like maybe 10 minutes, and I didn't talk about myself for a second. And then I ran into him at a co-working space, and then this job came up. And then so I guess when I, applied for it and spoke to him, we already had a way more authentic connection. I knew something about him, and I think that authenticness and just talking to someone as a person meant so much more than if I stood there and blabbed on about myself or, was afraid. I was just present in the conversation and actually interested.
Yeah,
in
like my job at EXP, I didn't even submit a resume. I was just like, I had a job and I was, talking to people about my job or whatever. And then eventually somebody's like, oh, I happen to know somebody who's looking for some people. And it was, just a contracting sort of thing to start off with. So it was just like, oh, I know a guy who has like a whole bunch of weird skills, and that's exactly what you need. Like, why don't you go get coffee? And so I had coffee with him like 2 months before I had my like first day at work, where he was just like, "Yep, we might not have work for you for a while, but like it's good that we met. Seems like a good fit." And then it really was. Like EXP was one of my favorite places to work because everybody was just so like people forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love it. So the takeaway there is like be a super nice person and make friends.
Yeah.
I think something that I always like to tell early career developers is, so people come into networking with this mindset that you're trying to sell yourself, and that they think the way you sell yourself is that sort of elevator pitch style thing of just like, here's who I am, here's where I work for, here's what job I want, as you described, Elise, your common experience in these networking style events. But the reality is like you're not harvesting fruit. You're not getting a job on the spot at the networking event. You're planting the seed. Like you are putting yourself in someone's mind so that they think of you next time a job opportunity comes up. So another little trick that I like to tell people is don't have an elevator pitch, have an elevator question. The best way to engage in a conversation is have a conversation starter ready to go that you can throw out there and start a conversation going. And the best one to go for is one that has nothing to do with games. Because I'm really bad at remembering names and faces. But if I ran into someone and went, "Oh, Max, remember when we talked about Daft Punk?" Like, yeah, I'm going to remember that person. Of course I am. Like, because it was nothing to do with games and it was about something that I'm interested in. So have an elevator question that sparks a conversation. Don't try to pitch yourself straight away.
That actually just made me think of when I got the job at Big Ant. They were like showing off their game at EB Games, and it was still game dev related, but I went up to not knowing not only the lead programmer at the time, but also the biggest advocate for like hiring more women and diverse people at the company. Yay. And I just went up to him and was like, "Oh, hey, this is like a lot of like very intense detail, and you've obviously got like photogrammetry in here. Do you do that in-house, or do you outsource your photogrammetry for these like for the players?" And that was like, "Oh, you actually know what you're talking about." Like, I didn't have to say I just got a degree in game design. I could have a conversation that implied I know a little thing about games, and the conversation kind of went from there. And that's what led to the interview, was just because I asked a question about like him and what he's working on, as opposed to like, "Hi, I'm Elise, I work here. Sorry about the blue shirt. I make video games. Like, yay, please hire me."
Yeah, and you're not going in with something to prove either. Because you're asking a question, you're like, "Hey, tell me about these cool things that you're doing." Because there are some people who will preface a question with a whole bunch of like jargon. It's like, I need to prove that I'm smart before I like ask a question first. And that comes off really poorly.
Yep. If any of you want to come and talk to me or any of us afterwards, like,
Talk
please
about
do.
Gilmore
Like, we're
Girls.
having networking, and I'll make it easy for you. Ask me about K-pop or The Office, and we'll have a great conversation. Do you have any like top topics that you could just talk about?
I mean, yeah, like Gilmore Girls and Survivor, but that
Great.
just makes it sound like I've never left the house. Like, I don't know, I like traveling as well. We can talk about traveling.
For me, that's a tough one. There's too many like small things. Like, talk to me about if you've knitted something cool. Absolutely. If you've got a cool crochet project going on, super into that. If you've got like a really crisp lawn, I'm here for it.
I want to have that conversation with you.
All right, so moving on now. So final question. What's something you'd like to see more of in the games industry? And Jake, I'll have you start us off on this one. Sure.
This one for me is very easy, and I think it's more specific for early career developers, but also kind of is for everyone. I want to actually see more people just focused on their art and their creative field and just enjoying that and being the best at that they can possibly be. Almost to the point where you don't give a crap about your career. It's like, your career is inevitable. You know, if you're like a mildly nice person and you're just really, really freaking good at what you do. You know, I feel like even when I was in university and I did it a little bit, and I see other people as well that are kind of just emerging or still in uni, they're so like, you know, how do I get a job? Who do I talk to? You know, someone look over my resume, portfolio this, CV that. It's like, yeah, it's important. But like, just be really amazing at what you do and have that passion. Like, people that are hiring and people that you might collaborate with, they will see that passion. Like when it's just like pouring out of you and you just start talking about how obsessed you are with like UV unwrapping, they'll be like, wow, that's the person that we need to get to come in and do all of our UV unwraps.
Yes, because that person does not exist.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, that I want to see that more. I want to see people more obsessed with their actual creative field, more so than their career or their job. Like just be obsessed with being awesome and creative. Yeah.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree with that more. Like I whenever I'm looking for the up and comers, I'm looking for the person who is happy to experiment. I want to hear about the person who's doing as many game jams as possible. I want to hear about the person who created something for the sake of creating it, not for the sake of their career, because it inevitably ends up being your best portfolio work when you make something that's not about getting a job, but just about you expressing yourself. So yeah. Couldn't agree more.
Great.
Elise?
How many times can I yell the word diversity? I would like more diversity in the industry, of course. Yes. I think there is... I guess it's kind of similar to what you said, but I think there's a lot of misconceptions as to how you work your way up in your career, and I think a lot of people find it to be like checking boxes, or like, oh, I have to do this, or like this will look good on my resume, or yeah, I'd like to see people be in it more for, I guess the passion of it, but also not. I feel like I see a lot of people taking advantage of each other and like not forming those correct relationships and being like, oh, I'm going to talk to this person because I think at some point it'll get me here.
Yeah, like collaborative energy.
Yeah, and I've seen it go wrong so many times of people being in it for the wrong reasons, or that inauthenticity of just like, I'm going to do this because I think it's the right thing to do and I think it'll look good to other people, versus like just similarly, like just spend time doing your job, be great at your job, be nice to people. Don't think about all these other things and like what looks good on resumes and what's going to leave a good impression over here. Like just do what you love, focus on that. Don't worry about what's happening in every other pocket of the industry. Like you'll drive yourself mad trying to keep up with everything. Like something specific, like I don't know game developers' names. I don't care about big studios. I don't know who I should talk to. I don't know what the recruiters are from companies. Like I'm just going to do my job. I'm going to do it really well. I'm going to leave a good impression on everyone I work with. When I talk to people, I'll show my passion, and that's going to get me far in the industry.
Absolutely, yeah. Beacon your talent at the end of the day. There's like a very stupid saying that I like, which is that it's not what you know and it's not who you know, it's who knows you. Like make those impressions, plant those seeds. Like that's what gets you far, is just being your authentic self and beaconing that out there into the world. You are so successful in your career if you just are your authentic self.
Yeah, I'll just add to that as well, of saying that I think people get in the trap of impressing upwards all the time. So like at work, I have to make my boss happy. I have to make my direct lead happy. Whereas I've had so many career opportunities from like an artist that I worked with on my team that I left a good impression on them, and they've gone off to another company. And when they were hiring a producer, they knew about me. So really getting away from this like career ladder thing, be the best person at your job to everyone in your company, not just your directors, because most likely your directors are going to stay at that company forever. So they're actually not going to help you get jobs in the future, because why would they want you to go somewhere else? Everyone else in your team that might leave and go somewhere else, like they're the ones that are going to carry you along for the ride.
Yeah, and if you have a job with like kind of a crap boss, that's a great opportunity to like have some solidarity with the people that you're working with.
Yeah, there's something like to say about this. Will sound odd. There's something to say about having a bad leader, because I worked 10 years in retail. Not everybody who worked at EB Games loved their job, and sometimes you work under bad leaders. It's inevitable. We're all going to do it at some point. We're going to have a bad leader to work under. I find that you actually learn the most, because you learn what not to be. You learn exactly in your head. You know exactly all the qualities of that person that you do not resonate with, and then you craft your personality around being nothing like that for the rest of your career, and you end up being an amazing leader.
Yeah, you learn more from mistakes, and they don't even have to be your mistakes. It's great. It's a little shortcut there for you. Mine is probably just going to rein it in on this thing, which is just like, I want to see like people bragging about their like 9 to 5 and like sleep schedules that work. Like, I love game jams. I really, really do. But
Please shower and sleep.
Well, yeah, like, because especially as like the programmer on those teams, it's like, all right, well, we need to have a build, right? So then you end up like kind of stretching, and then I need like a week afterwards to recover, right? Like I cannot keep doing game jams like that. And you know, if you really like that project, bad luck, because you just spent like 48 hours on it without any sleep, and now you're burnt out on that project. So yeah, just
Yeah, please never show off about working till 3 a.m. on your game.
yeah.
Nobody's impressed.
Yeah, I think that comes back to, Jake, what you were saying before about like being able to sell yourself and have confidence in yourself. Like if someone is asking you to work ridiculous overtime or to crunch or anything, just value yourself higher. Know that you're better than that.
Yeah.
Like if you go for another interview and they say, oh, why did you leave? And you say, because my boss was trying to make me work 6 days a week, 12-hour days. They're not going to be like, well, you're clearly difficult to work with. Like just own that you are a human, that you need 8 hours of sleep, that you need interest outside of video games. Like video games aren't your entire life. You don't have to dedicate yourself in that way. You know, be a good role model for other people. Like if I was a producer that worked like 14-hour days every single day, that's going to put pressure on the rest of my team that that's what I expect of them, which I absolutely do not. So, you know, set that as for yourself, like know that you are worth more than ridiculous hours and underpaid jobs, and just go for what you know you deserve, not what you think you deserve. I'm learning to swap think and know all the time. Not what you think what you deserve, like what you know you deserve. You're better than that. Believe in it.
I might rap on that, because that is a beautiful summary.
Great.
So we've got barely any time left, but just in case, no, that was beautiful. Questions. So we might just check the chat and see if we've had anything on the Twitch channel at all.
There is one.
Yep.
Do you think that it's true of the Australian industry currently, as well as in general caps, that the more common way to get promoted is by changing companies rather than getting promoted within a studio? Or any other thoughts or anecdotes around this concept?
Okay, so I'll just repeat that. I'll summarize that. Okay, so basically the question was around the idea of like, is success jumping between companies along your career pathway, or is it staying in one company? And what would you consider the more successful pathway? That's a really good question. I will start with Jake on this one.
I was going to say I probably don't have that much to say on it. Like my career in games has been mostly just me trying to do my own thing. And the work I've done for other companies has basically just been contract work. So I actually don't know. I don't really have any insight into that, and I'm sorry.
Elise?
I guess almost like painfully similar. I'm a producer, so like where was I ever going to go from the producer in the team? Like I could probably get pay rises, but not promotions as such, because I can't. If I'm the lead producer, I'm still the only producer, so it doesn't really make a difference besides the title. I don't think that is necessarily true, except for the fact that a lot of companies in Australia are quite small, so there isn't necessarily a lot of room to grow upwards. For me, the way I've always classified like moving on to jobs is where I feel like I'm not learning anymore. Like I'm actually just sitting back and just going through the motions, and I'm not learning new information. That for me is the time where you move on, not necessarily for a promotion, but just to continue your path and make sure that you're always learning.
Jimbles?
Yeah, like I think Elise hit the nail on the head, right? Because it is just like, depending on the size of the company, because Australia does have a lot of very small companies, and it's like, well, I can say that I'm a senior programmer now because there is no other programmer, or the senior programmer left, and you know I can just have that role, but the money's not going up because the money coming in as a company isn't going up. So, like, how are you supposed to do that? Yeah, I think you nailed it.
Yeah, I echo your thoughts completely on that one, Elise. I think that it is about it's not about whether you stay or whether you go. It is about your personal journey. It is about, are you continuing to learn? Do you feel supported? It's questions about your own mental health and about your ability to grow as a person. That's the way that you should think about it. Not about, you know, whether I should stay or go in terms of my career, but like, what's good for me? Am I feeling good in my job right now? Do I need to look elsewhere? Am I growing? Am I learning more? I think that's the better way to sort of focus and understand that.
Yeah, and it also depends on the project, you know. That's the thing. Like, if you really care about the project, then you don't really you're not as concerned about upward mobility as you are about like the project being the best it can be. So that's another thing to consider, I guess.
Jack, do we have any other questions in the chat at all?
There was one, it's up to you if you want to run with this. Do you think international markets are here with Australian accents from game characters, or they even Aussie-made games need American accents? Is that relevant to this discussion?
I don't know if that's.
I don't know if it's relevant.
I have thoughts, but I will share them on Twitter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think what I might do, because we're hitting up against 12, so apologies to the room right now. I think what we'll do is we're about to go into a networking lunch. I think the room can discuss directly with the panel any further questions, and we'll wrap on this today. So thank you so much to my amazing panelists, Elise, Jake, Jimballs. Thank you so much to SAE for partnering with us on this event. Thanks so much to Jack, who did all of the live video production today. Yeah, I'm so happy with how this went, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Kerry.